I have so much to talk about, but I'll just make one more video today and just edit them tomorrow. And I didn't mention that tonight will be the first night that I take half a Benadryl. The last 4 nights I took 3/4, and tonight I'll take half for 4 days and then a quarter. And hopefully I can sleep just fine. And after I finished the last video, I was thinking about how, in a way, all of the perceptions we talk about when we're in map consciousness and we share with people is an attempt to ask, do you see what I see? So if I'm sharing something about the relationships of a bird with a particular tree or something that I feel I can see and understand, these subtle perceptions, and I share it with somebody, it's like saying, can you see what I see? And generally over time, it seems like people can't see what we see. And eventually it turns into a hallucination. That question, can you see what I see, turns into a question from the ego perspective, which is deemed a hallucination. So whenever somebody shares that they're seeing something that's not there, maybe at first they don't even know it's not there until somebody says, that's not there. Like if I say, oh, I see Elvis in the corner of the room, somebody would say, I don't see what you see. But when it's more obvious, when it's turned into that later, after these subtle perceptions have not been able to be shared and met and had dialogue about, ego again, the ego projects and hallucinates. It's always doing that anyways. All of our so-called normal thoughts are just projections of our ego. But when they're within a certain so-called normal range, then it's okay. But as soon as we're actually seeing something that's not there and it's really obvious because somebody else is able to really confirm it, or maybe we're able to confirm it ourselves because we know that Elvis is no longer living, then we might be really feeling, wow, I'm hallucinating, I'm seeing things that aren't there. But we're all seeing things that aren't there all the time. They're not things. They're subtle energies, and we can give voice to them. But I feel like when those subtle energies, when we're not able to learn that language and give voice to them, those subtle energies turn into ego energy because we're not giving voice to them, so they're turned into more ego voice and ego energy. And the ego is words and image making. So it's either going to be turned into more words or more image making. So if we can actually turn it into words in this other way that is not in reference to the ego, it's not going to add fuel to the ego to a point where it starts projecting more images, which could just be telling us, hey, you can see things that aren't there. You can see things that are everywhere, that are subtle patterns, subtle energies. And if you can give voice to them, you're not going to be projecting things from your ego and saying, I'm seeing something that's not there. It gets turned into, I can only say, hey, I'm seeing something that's not there, when I'm not able to connect with all these subtle energies and the infinite words that it's going to create otherwise if we're able to connect with that subtle energy. So I'm seeing what I'm saying as I'm saying it, but who knows if anyone ever will get what I'm saying. But I feel that's one of the ways that I've been able to talk to myself so much is I'm seeing subtle energies, I'm seeing patterns, I'm seeing interference patterns, I'm seeing into the quantum hologram. But if I was to ignore that, and that energy's still there, it's got to be translated into something, and it's going to be translated into more body tissue because I'm using medications to mediate it, or it's going to be translated into more thoughts about myself and scariness, because that energy could be scary if we're not able to actually really connect it with it. And if we feel like this energy is a harmful process, then it's going to seem that way. Because in a way, it is harming our ego structure, and that structure is something we rely on to stay functioning in society. So we value functioning, but we don't necessarily value these new functions that are coming online and that we can actually invite to come online by participating with this energy. So I feel that bit is really important, and the last video is important too, to actually see the mechanism that is turning this energy into something that seems to onlookers like a mental illness. But if we can master it, then maybe that will never happen. And these are ifs, because I went through a long journey in the mental health system to get to this point, to be able to talk about it with myself in this way. So I will never know if it can just be moved through without the mental health paradigm, because I didn't have the opportunity to do that. But perhaps other people one day might. And that's one of the big reasons why I talk to myself. And also, I want to have people to talk about this stuff and whatever, infinite energies and subtleties with, not just personal stories and things. We're so enamored by that, and then we have to hear more and more of it in entertainment, and it just goes on and on and on. And one day we'll just be born with a chair tied to our ass. And I came across an email or an article about how Elon Musk wrote this email to his employees because the safety rate at the Tesla plants is actually 30% lower than the average in industry or something like that. I don't have all the details perfect, but I never look at the details. I just look at the pattern, and then I'm able to talk to myself about it for quite a period of time. And he mentioned that he is actually interested in learning the tasks that his employees are getting injured by doing. So I found that really fascinating, because I've talked before about embodied empathy and how I've felt at times like a homeless person on the street, and how I feel that informs something in me moving forward. So I feel like that so-called dissociation is actually embodied empathy. And what Elon Musk is doing is sort of embodied empathy, but it goes beyond, because he's actually wanting to take action to really embody the empathy by learning the task that is leading to him needing to feel empathetic towards that situation. And out of that, I created a new word called empathaction. So it's a combination of empathy and action. So it's one thing to actually feel empathetic towards a person, like really feeling their pain, but it's another thing to actually take empathaction, to take action based on that empathy. So me feeling like a homeless person on the street is embodied empathy, but it's not really empathaction. And I feel like that experience shows me, for one, we're one consciousness, we're not separate, so I can experience anything that any human being can, and I don't have to be that person, because it's in consciousness, and that pattern could be entrained or connected with through the morphogenetic field, and I could actually act out being that way, like crouching on the street and freezing cold. And it's actually trying to show me, hey, people are suffering, get out there and do something. And I do things, but I feel like there's some kind of empathaction that comes out of that, which is doing something to help a homeless person. So it's one thing to feel the empathy, but doing something is another. So I take Elon Musk's gesture of wanting to learn those jobs as empathaction. It's not just empathy. So I was grateful for making that word up based on what I read. And the other thing I thought about in terms of how there's a 30% higher injury rate is that it could be a good sign in a way. It means people are really trying. It means they're willing to put in their best effort for that company. They're really stretching themselves. They're really doing something. So having a 30% higher injury rate could just be a sign of everyone trying to do great things for a great company. Doesn't mean that that shouldn't be minimized and looked at. I'm just saying that there's probably 30% higher injury rate in people who run to train for Ironmans than people who just run for leisure. So maybe in some companies people are just working for leisure and just going through the motions, but maybe at Tesla they're really trying to do something. And that's a strange way to look at it, but I look at most things in strange ways. And there was a line in the email that was really profound. He said, "I will go down to the production line and perform the same task." and my mind extrapolated to my experience, which has nothing to do with the particulars of what he's saying, going to the production line of a Tesla plant, but extrapolating it to my context, I realized I've been to and through the production line of creating mental patients. I've played many roles. I've played psych ward patient, I've played community mental health patient, I've played peer support worker, I've played advocate, I've played sharer of my story, I've played so many roles. And just as he wants to learn the tasks on the production line in order to learn more about them to minimize injury to others in the future, that's sort of what I would like to do. I've been to the production lines, and now I want to light the way out. And not that everybody wants to get out, but yeah, it just felt like that was a cool extrapolation transformation. Transforming what he said into, I've done that. I've been to the production lines, and maybe I can see some things that might help produce better lives for people, and not necessarily in opposition of the system. Sometimes it takes somebody who can see things differently. So if Elon is able to learn the tasks and say, oh, I can see that this isn't working very well, let's change it to this so people won't get hurt. That's all I want to help with. That's all I want to do, is change things a bit so people won't get hurt. Because people are getting hurt in this system that is supposed to help people. So if Elon was trying to build all these amazing cars, but people are getting too hurt, then at some point he might say, well, I shouldn't really be building these cars if it can't be done in a way that's not going to hurt people. And the system is designed to help, but it also hurts a lot. And I would say the injury rate through the system is probably near 100%. And numerous injuries, not just one on one occasion and then it gets healed and things get better and injury never happens again. 100% of people probably get injured through the system hundreds of times. And if you take that out to the industry, if you said everyone that goes through this system gets injured hundreds of times, it would be completely not profitable, but in this industry of psychology, injuring people actually creates more profits. And I've learned a lot about what injures us in the mental health system and keeps us in it and keeps us limited. And there's a lot of psychological injury going on, which is injuring the relationship. And the way we're received from day one injures the relationship. And I sort of wonder how I can strengthen my relationships with psychiatrists. And I just wrote this down today because I kind of want to just sever them. But when we work out, when we lift weights, we actually injure our muscles, but we don't sever them. We injure them. But that injury, that damage actually creates the muscles to heal stronger. So can I challenge them in some way? And I was thinking when I go back home, just never going back to a psychiatrist, but then I was thinking, what if I went back and just shared with them what happened here in California? I kind of fear it a little bit just because even going back into like an office could be somewhat re-traumatizing. Maybe I could ask to have a meeting out in the community and saying, I want to meet with you, but you have to meet me in the community. We'll see. Or I could even say, yeah, I still have this, but I'm supporting it in a completely different way. I'm supporting it with nutrition, and my nervous system feels a lot stronger. So I haven't decided about that, but I might actually go back and share with my psychiatrist, who I haven't seen in probably 5 months. And also that 10-minute time I have at that festival, I might actually find a creative way to share my story instead of doing that comedy. I'm pretty much set on not doing that comedy, but find some kind of creative way to share this. or share something. I don't know. And in the article about Elon Musk's email, they were saying, oh, it's a lesson in emotional intelligence. And I feel like map consciousness is actually a lesson in emotional and relational intelligence, which is really underdeveloped in us. But when the ego gets scrambled, we have an opportunity to learn that language. It's a completely different language. It's not the language of rationality and reason, but it can actually become more rational over time. Just like over time, through human development and existence, the intellect has become more and more rational. And perhaps emotional and relational intelligence can actually become more rational. So right now we see it as really irrational, but perhaps there hasn't been any energy put towards bringing rationality into that somehow. And I have no idea what that looks like. It's probably just still in its infancy. And I actually feel like so-called mental illness is actually just a relational illness. We're not relating to each other, and we're just relating based on these separative egos. And then when someone gets connected to something beyond that, people that relate based on the ego see it as odd and then try to fit them back into the ego category with these chemical medication band-aids. How can somebody who operates based on the ego see the gifts or even see that someone is seeing beyond the ego consciousness when they've never been able to touch that themselves? So it's more about being limited by the dominant paradigm. If this other way of seeing had more energy and more people were able to communicate in different ways, then maybe just the ego way of communication would be well, it just wouldn't be the only way of communicating. People might actually understand, okay, right now I'm communicating from my emotions. Right now I'm communicating from the ego. Right now from intellect. Right now from relationality. Right now from empathy. Right now from... They're all different colors of the rainbow of our expressions, but we all translate it into this ego language and attribute it to some kind of perceptual center that isn't there. So, yeah, and maybe sometimes we'd be like, I'm just speaking on behalf of the lizards right now. I was looking at them and I noticed this. Or they sort of whispered this to me by just observing them. And it's the same thing with science. They observe certain things and they put language to it. But there's a science of actually clear perception in the moment that doesn't require a scientific language. Perhaps it's a Gaiantific language. And if we're able to connect more with that, there'll be this richness of communication. It seems like this is all a miscommunication. We're not able to communicate. We're missing communication. We're missing communicating about subtle energies that we're able to perceive and give voice to. So it's a relational miscommunication. I don't want to use the word illness. It's a relational miscommunication. And it's also just only relating to each other based on our egos. And that's one way to do it, but not all the ways and every way and the only way. So, and to me, it resonates with how a lot of people start losing their ego structure and things like Alzheimer's and dementia and different neurodegenerative diseases of the brain, but it's because we're not generating all these other faculties that we have, and that ego structure is just so frail. It's really frail, and we don't have these other ways of communicating and perceiving to buffer that. It's not that the ego's bad. It just sort of becomes bad when it's the only way that we're able to communicate, and then we get bored, and then we get restless, and then we get... because it's not the only way. It's not the only thing the brain is capable of. So can we improve our listening space? Can we listen from different areas of the brain? Listen from the ego, but also listen from this place beyond it that is recognizing that somebody's not talking just about themselves and their ego, or the structures of society and business and all these things that are acceptable to talk about, but maybe opening this area of the brain that might be receptive to talking about subtle perceptions and refining our perception and not just projecting our opinions onto everything. I'm sure they can make some really good computers that can argue about opinions all day long and debate based on a stored memory bank of all of human history. Is that what life's about? And can we apply epi-listening ethics? So I have epigesturetics, but I created epi-listening ethics, and I don't know if that's the word I'll keep, but it's something about if we're able to listen from the spaciousness and listen for subtle perceptions and meaning beyond what one is saying. What are the gestures that happen from accurate listening? Not listening through one's opinions being projected onto what the other person's saying and not really listening. And we already do this in a way. If somebody says, "Oh, I wish I had a coffee," they might actually be saying, "Can you get me a coffee? I don't want to get up," or "I can't get up right now," or something. So we already, by listening to the meaning beyond what somebody's really saying, if I listen to, "Oh, I wish I had a coffee," I might just walk over and grab that person a coffee. Or I might be like, they can get their own coffee and just walk off. So are we able to do this on a more subtle level? Are we able to understand when maybe somebody's sharing a subtle perception and be open to it and sort of in those moments at least drop our opinions and wonder, how did they see that? How did they come up with that? And that might be a question for somebody in a state of map consciousness when somebody's trying to understand, how did you come up with that? How did that arise in your mind? Not, "Oh, that's something was wrong with them." There is no them there. Where's this them? Where's this ego? There's no person. It's, how did this arise in consciousness? And when somebody's speaking about their past or their childhood or what happened yesterday or, something they learned in school or what they had for breakfast, there's never a question, how did they come up with that? It's from memory. But when somebody's saying something that obviously isn't coming from their memory, then we think they're strange, because everything should just be regurgitated out of memory. It shouldn't actually come from being in connection with this moment. And so actually wondering, how did this person arise with this or these words or whatever it is? But we don't wonder about that because we're so fixated by memory. So we're just living in our memories. And when somebody is living in something that seems like it's not memory, then something has got to be wrong. But when we rely so much on memories and then those break down later in life and there's nothing else there, then we're just kind of a vegetable. But we don't have to let our brain deteriorate in this way, because it's not meant to just be regurgitating memories all the time. So we need to move towards inviting these types of sharings out in each other, not just being comfortable when somebody's sharing something that they obviously read in the headlines this morning. That's just so easy. Then we're comfortable, then we feel safe and secure because somebody is reading us the headlines each day. What about when people are trying to go live with things that are living now? That makes us afraid? If we just start and earlier as we multiply, and as technology uses us instead of utilizing it for a creative tool of sharing.